Welcome. I am so excited for this hour with my good friend Ellen Barton. Before we kick it off, though, we have over 180 people attending today's LinkedIn Live, and I would just love if you all see in the chat for you to share where you're dialing in from. And also, I know Ellen just came back from Buffalo, and I know Buffalo has some really interesting food there. So if you want to share where you're dialing in from and a local delicacy that you love to have from that area. I am joining today from Brooklyn. I know that New York is known for pizza, but I am gluten free. So right now, I've just been really into the ice cream. This new ice cream place opened up on my street, which is very dangerous, and it's vegan, but actually amazing. So if you want to take a moment and just share it with us where you're joining in from, that would be great because we would love to see that chat going. So thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
and the food as well. I'm here today in near Binghamton, New York, and we are known for the speedy. I don't know if everybody knows what speedies are, but it's such a big deal here. They actually have a speedy festival. So speedy is like a marinated meat. It's a special recipe that's from this area, and typically you grill it. It's kind of delicious. You can have it on a salad or in a sandwich. Very yummy. So we have a big Speedy festival, and you eat Speedies and listen to music, and there's hot air balloons. I don't know how all those things go together, but it's kind of amazing.
Well, speaking of hot air balloons, my other home, I've had many in my life, but is Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is the home of the International Balloon Fiesta and green chili, which, if you have never been to New Mexico, you just have not
Oh, wait,
experienced.
Hatch chilies.
Exactly. Oh, all right. So
Awesome.
you're speaking my
Yeah.
language. You're speaking my
Yeah.
language. Um, Great. Well, while we're getting started, everybody, we're so excited. We are going to talk about things beyond food, but later, maybe if we have time, Elliot, to explain
Good place to
the
start.
buffalo that has like the Frito chilies in it. I mean, it is. I guess it's not quite lunchtime, but I am always hungry. And I'm also Nora Herting, co-founder and CEO of ImageThink. I am joined today by Sasha Brito, who you will see on screen. Sasha is going to be working behind the scenes, which she is our senior visual strategist. Say hello, Sasha, or give us a little drawn wave. And she'll be listening, synthesizing, and visualizing this conversation, which you'll have access to along with an awesome companion guide that Ellen's team has put together. And so I'm just so happy that Ellen is joining us. She is also a co-founder and CEO of Riveo Creative, who help clients tell impactful stories. And actually, I just read has helped clients raise over $40 million in fundraising with video storytelling and other things. So, Ellen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. This is such a great topic. Storytelling is so powerful, and marrying it with innovative visuals, hey, unstoppable.
I know
Love it.
exactly a winning combination. So let's just get started
Yeah.
because you have this numbers to narrative method, which I'm excited for everyone to dive into. But what's the first thing you say? You ask a client who says, "We've got data, but no story."
Yeah, so that's a great question, and we have this method, like you mentioned, the companion guide, and you can see the whole framework in there. You can request that after this webinar, or during this webinar, I guess. But where we start is we always want to find out what the high level goals are, what the company's mission is, what they're trying to accomplish, and then pull out the stories that support that narrative. Stories are so powerful, but without a strategy, you are, in my opinion, you're wasting a lot of energy. You want to make sure that the stories you're telling are aligned with those goals that you're trying to accomplish. So we have this whole method. There's 4 steps to it: identify the stories, analyze the data that you're looking to exemplify in those stories, humanize them, because without the human element, you don't get that emotional connection. And emotional connection is what spurs people to action, and then leverage. So I think we're going to talk about all those things in this conversation. That's our plan anyway. But that's where we get started with this kind of like basic framework. And on the visual side, what do you think, Nora? Why are visuals such a powerful tool for telling impact stories?
Yeah, well, listen, you said part of your framework, right, is emotion, and visuals help connect emotion with information, whether it's about a patient journey or a community transformation or a big organizational change. As you know, data rarely alone moves people, but the visuals, along with the story, help humanize the message. The other thing that, where visuals are so powerful in the storytelling is they clarify complexity. We can fit a lot of complex information or impact into one image, one synthesized image, in ways that words just can't. And Sasha, who's capturing for us right now, is a master at that for clients. And then lastly, they make it more memorable and shareable. And the neuroscience tells us that people remember images far more vividly than just text, right? So a compelling visual story will stay with your audience. It'll travel with them long after a meeting ends or a campaign wraps. And that's why this is, like, as you said, such a powerful combination of your framework with storytelling and then really just putting the visuals to that to really give it that punch, and make it even more memorable. Um, and I know that we talked a little bit about emotion in the storytelling, but another thing that I imagine that you hear from clients is a lot of metrics, and how do you go about humanizing metrics for your clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. Everybody wants to talk about the numbers, but behind all of those numbers, behind any numbers, there's always human stories. If you dig hard enough, if you dig far enough, there's always some people that are being affected in one way or another by the metrics. So let me give you an example. We have this client, and what they do is they go into land or neighborhoods or whatever that have been that are environmentally toxic. So there's been a chemical spill or something happened in this area and it's problematic. They clean up the land, and a lot of times they'll repurpose this, often building like a community center or a co-working space or something like that once the land is clean and once it's safe. So if you go on this company's website, I wrote down some numbers here so you can find out on their website. They've repositioned and redeveloped over 200 properties. They've got $500 million of deployed equity. They're working in 49 states. They're working across 4 countries. They've repurposed more than 9,000 acres. Impressive numbers. Absolutely. You're never going to remember those numbers after this call, most likely. So, but they're certainly impressive. What you may remember is if I tell you the story about Maria, a single mom who was living near one of these areas and very concerned for her health and the health of her children. This is where she could afford to live. So imagine her gratitude when this space was cleaned up, a community center was built. The kids now have a safe place to go. One of them gets a job there. Her life is changed because this company came in and did this cleanup. It's not just about numbers. It's about people and the people that are affected by the actions that our companies and organizations are taking. So that's a small example of how you can take all those numbers and zoom into one story and just exemplify what this company is doing and why it matters. So it's interesting what you do with your visuals, and people learn in different ways. Some people like to absorb information listening to podcasts or watching a video. Some people like to read, and others are just visual learners. And so I think it's really interesting. Your clients come to you with these complex ideas. Sometimes they're chaos. And you have to help them find clarity and translate that into visuals that people can quickly and easily understand and remember. How do you do that?
Yeah, there is a lot of complexity in chaos. And sometimes the real act is around getting the client to tell the story to us at the beginning of the project, which is, kind of interesting to hear you talk about it, which is you're helping clients at the end tell the story. And they aren't necessarily coming to us thinking about a story and storytelling, but oftentimes there'll be a story buried in there, right? So when we work with, maybe a big change management project, say, or we're working right now with an organization that runs 4 nonprofits, really brilliant, passion-driven people, very, very smart, very academic. And you kind of have to sift through everything, and then you ask them to talk about their work, and their eyes light up, right? And they suddenly have a story. And in this call, the person said, well, listen, we're really talking about capacity building and how to enable small organizations to have a bigger impact. And if we had been given $50 million last year at this organization, we still would have failed if we hadn't built this capacity. And I was like, wow, that really, really resonates, right? And so oftentimes what we do is we try to start from the humanization from the beginning, and um, we'll get, reams of PowerPoint material, but really we'll get on the call and we'll just ask this leader or this client to talk. And hearing how they talk about it will often help set us up for the metaphors that will end up amplifying the story for them. So, that's one example of, of how we kind of cut through all that complexity. Another story I love to tell was a client of ours who had just been given a new job, and it was not only a new role for her, but it was also a brand new position within this life science organization. So there was nothing defined, and she wanted to have a meeting with her boss, and then her boss invited her boss, and then the boss's boss decided to come, and our client Randy was getting really, understandably nervous. And we met with her, and she had this big template. She had this matrix of information, and she had a very short window of time with these really senior leaders. And so I asked her, I said, well, listen, at the end of the day, what do you really want to get? And she said, well, that's easy. I want to know what it is they want me to do in the order they want me to do it. Well, that's pretty simple, right? And so I took a step back, I picked up my pen, I drew on the whiteboard this really simple visual of a bridge, and on one side it was the current state, and on the other side it was the future state. And I said, what if we scrap all of these templates that you want to ask these really senior people to populate? And we just show them this picture and we ask them to talk about it. And she looked at me and she said, I love it. And so that's what we did. We went into this meeting with that framework, and we had them, we story told kind of about, her position, and they helped create the story together. And when they left, she had a very, very clear mandate of what it was that she needed to do. But she told us that not only that, but then she had that for everyone on her team that she was onboarding. So something that was really vague and complicated became really, really simple with that visual framework and that story. So,
Really awesome.
that,
That's really interesting.
yeah, yeah. Again, it's great to to really story tell through these things. So, um, you know, I would really love for you to walk us. You told us about Maria, right? And that was such a great story and such a great cause. But can you walk us through a moment where a story really changed how people you worked with responded to an organization?
Yeah, totally. So we also work with a lot of nonprofits, and there's this one nonprofit in our community that we've worked with them for many years, almost since the inception of our company. But before we started with them, they had a lot of problems. And one of their problems is that this nonprofit, they run so many programs. They run, like, at any given time, probably 35 or 40 programs. Sometimes they change depending on funding, but they do a lot in the community. And they employ hundreds of people in the organizations. So the people that they employ, they tend to know a lot about their own department and their own program. They don't even necessarily know what other people within the organization are doing or how to talk about it as a whole, or they didn't. Um, and the community is also kind of, or was also kind of confused about this organization. They knew about public facing, like they knew about the food pantries. They run food pantries. You can see the food pantries. So they kind of became known as the food pantry place, but they run all these other programs. So, how did we approach that? We had to start telling the stories of people who are affected by the different programs in a positive way. And that wasn't hard to find because this organization makes such a great impact. But when we started to focus on these stories, and we married that focus with strategy, so not only like finding the right stories to tell, telling the stories, getting it out there in a meaningful way. So we had to, and the other thing that the organization was struggling with was they had supporters. A lot of them were older, and they wanted to attract a younger audience. So it was like finding the stories, telling the stories, and then getting it out in the right places so that we weren't always just like, speaking into an echo chamber of people that already knew that this was a great organization. And when we started focusing on the stories and doing this in an effective way, the transformation has been enormous. So now the stakeholders, the employees, have a much better understanding of what impact this organization is having as a whole beyond the food pantries that are public facing. So that's a big deal. They're finding that they're getting better fit applicants coming in, applying for jobs because people now know about this impact, and that's a great attractor of job applicants. But it's like right fit people. It's not so much of the people that aren't going to get hired anyway because they just aren't, the right people for this. People are understanding what they do and the impact they make. But maybe most impressively, an increase of 55% of monetary donations. Huge.
Wow.
In this time of cuts. Yeah, huge. So it's all about stories, the emotional connection that we develop with our audience when we tell stories, spurs them to action, like whether it means donating or whether it means purchasing or whatever it is. People react to stories. We're hardwired to do that. So I always find that really fascinating.
I have a
But
few questions for you on that before. I know you have a question for me, but do you mind?
of
Yeah.
course, go ahead. Yeah.
So this resonates. I think we have definitely encountered this kind of phenomenon, especially in mission-driven organizations that we work with. And I'm just curious. In this story, did you feel like when you first started working with the leadership or inside the company that they were aware of all of these stories, and they just were not showcasing them, or did you find that you actually helped pull them out? And I guess, and then part B is, as you went through that, was it also, how did you go about collecting them? Was it internal and external? Were they readily available? I just think that folks that are joining us are probably thinking, wow, this is great. This is a great story. What an incredible impact, and what did that look like exactly when you went in to start working with them?
Yeah, those are great questions. So in the case of this organization, thinking about leadership, they did know that they were making an impact, like they weren't completely out of touch with that. But they, like the director of this nonprofit, was busy writing grants and doing all the things that directors of nonprofits do, going to state, meetings in the Capitol in Albany or whatever. They weren't necessarily focused on getting all the directors of the different divisions to pull out the stories. Like everybody's busy in a nonprofit, right? They're doing their job. But when we when we highlighted the importance of doing that, and we developed also a system for them to do it easily, so that it wasn't like, oh, it's time to do the annual report. Everybody think of all the stories from the year that you that you have, and we'll figure it out. We started to collect the stories throughout the year and identify, as we were going along, like which were going to be the ones that were really going to have an impact. So we had to change the way we were doing things. Like, yes, people were aware that there were stories to be had, but they weren't doing anything to collect them beforehand. And so they were getting data. And so when we started working with them, like their annual reports looked like a lot of data. It was impressive. And you saw like they would collect pictures, not really great pictures, but just snapshots from their different events and things without a lot of context and without the stories to back them up. And, and to give them that meat that people remember and respond to. So they had a lot of the core elements, but they just weren't. They had all the ingredients, but they weren't mixing them together to into the recipe. Since it's lunchtime, we'll use another food
Yeah,
analogy.
let's build on that, and the sweetie. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And I think that is really interesting. That can be a takeaway just today, is around within your organization, like how do you start to like harvest just these stories as they're occurring. And I want to remind everybody, we will be taking questions. So you have the chat in LinkedIn Live. And as you're going, if you want to post questions, we're going to have a little bit of time, hopefully at the end. Because it's so exciting, Ellen. I'm getting this note, that we have people from the south of France, from Kazakhstan, from Colorado Springs, Arizona, um,
That's awesome.
joining us, right? And it's making me hungry thinking about all the incredible food in all of
That's awesome.
those places.
That's very cool. Yeah. I want to just say the word intention. So knowing the stories are powerful, having the intention to capture them, write them down, gather them, and then think about how you can leverage them. Intention is first. Um, Question for you.
Hmm.
When we talked about humanizing data, and that's such an important step, what does that mean visually?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so, you know, like you, we do a lot of work in life sciences as well, and that can be really complicated. Complicated biology, drugs, the molecular components behind it, or it can be complicated in thinking about how a drug just makes it, out to a patient. But at the end of the day, like people work so hard in that field because they care about patients and they care about the impact. And just as you said, Elin, everyone is busy, their heads down sometimes, doing the work that they're doing without being able to remember, pause, and what the impact is. And so for us, a lot of times, like a statistic, you said 40, your client worked in 49 states, or 500 of acres they remediated. But for us, we try to connect that to the context and then the impact. So for instance, if someone says, well, 25% of patients delay care, if that's a data point we have, well, then we're looking at giving that context visually. That could be, why are patients delaying care, and illustrating all of those factors that might go into someone delaying care. Also connecting on the other end, if they are delaying care, what does that impact on them, on their families, right? So we really help teams connect those abstract metrics to a lived experience that is not just, isolated, but it connects to a larger story. And within that, stories are always about people, right? And so creating that empathy and that continuity, to connect those data points to what that looks like in the real world. So, Elin, I have another question for you, which is, we're talking about impact of storytelling, and you have, that example around driving 50% more donations for that organization. So what makes it, what would you say makes a story impactful versus just, interesting or amusing?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there is a lot of strategy that comes into this whole equation. And I think a good way to illustrate this is to think about your reputation and your legacy. And they say that what that is that's what people say about you when you're not in the room. And to me, a story is impactful when it ties back to your mission and when people remember it and they refer to it when they speak about your organization and when you're not even asking them to do so. So those stories help people kind of form an opinion about your company, about what you stand for, what your values are. So important. That's also where people like to align their dollars or whatever, whatever currency you use in your country. But people like to align their spending with companies whose values they agree with and align with. So like stories that exemplify that are powerful. And you know what happens when you start to use the stories in these ways, in these impact stories strategically, is you start to create brand advocates. And brand advocates are kind of like, it's the holy grail. It's what everybody wants, is somebody that's going to talk positively about your company, your organization, and your brand when you're not even asking them to. I have a few companies I'm loyal to because of this very reason, because I know their stories. I feel like I know their founder story. I know what they stand for and I believe in it. And so I'll talk about them. They're not asking me to do that. I like truly feel aligned with them. So that's the power of story when you start to leverage it and think about it as these impact stories. Think about what are those stories that you can tell that are going to have that effect on people. So that's my definition. It's a little bit broad, but I think it works for the purpose of this discussion. And I want to ask you, because I keep saying strategy,
Mhm.
Nora. You say the image think helps teams see their strategy. I think that's very interesting. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, literally, right? We see their strategy, and uh, by putting it into a picture and bringing everyone within an organization and all the initiatives within that one picture, that one story, right?
Mhm.
And that looks like a few different things, because strategy without the story behind the why is just, I think, a to-do list, right? And so you and I both really, I think the big theme around the storytelling is it connects with the impact, with the why, or the initiative. And so that's why we always, when we're working with a client, try to frame it at some point by saying, okay, well, what is going to be the impact of this initiative on you as an individual, on your team, on the company at large, on your clients or your patients, and the world, right? And then that starts to get people to really think big picture and align around, around what the real intention is and what the real goal is. Because without that vision, right, and without that impact being illustrated, again, you're going to have confusion. You're going to have maybe misalignment. You're going to have burnout. Like I said, then it's just a to-do list. So first and foremost, just like you were really trying to get people to articulate and amplify what that impact is, and whether that's the why is like the entire mission of the company. We were talking about some nonprofits, or just the impact of that particular initiative, right? And then once you can align on that and you have people literally see that impact and contemplate it, then what we need to do to get there becomes a lot more clear. I told about that story about our and that really simple framework around a bridge. Another example is a company that we worked with right before COVID, 2019. They're a sales organization. They had merged, they had acquired another company. This was in the life sciences space. And their North American sales leader called me up and he said, there's been a lot of layoffs, right? There were efficiencies. The management team is kind of burnt out and we need to do something. And so we came in and, got them to really think about what it was that they wanted to be doing. And they had a big goal, and it was a number goal. And through that process, they ended up visualizing a strategy that was sort of three pillars that they were like, this is what we need to do to get where we're going. And we drew it together, and it was literally a metaphor. It was a boat sailing, setting sail. And at the next day, I got a note, and they said we couldn't believe the next day that these leaders came in and presented this with such passion and such clarity. And then COVID happened, and the next year they called me up and they said, we don't know what we would have done without this picture. This picture aligned all of us around our vision. We knew what we needed to do, our strategy to get there. And our CEO even spoke to this visual picture that we had, and we had a lot of things come up, right, that were unexpected, but we were really clear about where we were going and the strategy to get there. And then the great thing is we did it for them again, and then that story, they decided it needed to evolve. They were in a boat, they had like sailed off to sea, and now they were in outer space, and they were launching, they were launching out of the solar system. So we kind of like had fun with this metaphor with them. And they were able to take that then to the teams nationally and tell this new story about their new strategy and where they were going. And what makes that also so impactful is people can literally place themselves within the story, right? They become characters too. They understand what their role is in the strategy, in the vision, because they're all looking at the same picture and they can really orient where they are. And the leaders have one cohesive story to tell over and over again.
Oh, that's so cool. Love it.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of how it works in practice, I guess.
Yeah.
Let me I have like so many questions for you. Like one is, how do you help clients identify the right story when there's so much data? Like in my example, right, we kind of listened for what they were saying, the metaphors they were using, and the group kind of aligned around, this is the story we need to tell about the strategy. And we're going to use this metaphor of us like all being on a boat and being pushed by these, by these winds or whatnot. But, how do you help them kind of identify, what's the right story?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I want to share our company 16 years ago, we started out as a video production company. Nowadays, we do a lot more than that. We've brought in strategy, we do a lot of brand work, story work, graphics, all kinds of different services that we offer now, social media content, etc. But we started out with video, so we still make a lot of videos. And I love the space story, that metaphor, the sailing boat and the rocket ship's awesome and very easy to understand the strategy when you're using that. What we usually do is a little bit different, and usually we're creating content for websites or social media or annual reports or something like that. And something I want to remember to say is that it's very important to us that these stories are authentic. Because what I'm going to tell you about is our process. And we don't like manipulate stories. We want to tell true stories, authentic stories that illustrate the point, but we want to find the right stories that align with the mission and what we're trying to convey. So I hope that makes sense. It's really important to me that we have the authenticity. And sometimes, and you need to have the human element. So you need to find the story that illustrates the data or whatever, your mission or whatever you want to talk about. So oftentimes, we have to do what we call pre-interviews. So we'll talk, the company or organization might say, okay, we have some ideas about these people that might have good stories, but we're not sure which direction to go in. So we do pre-interviews, and we'll meet with them on Zoom or however they want to meet and just go through questions with them and try to pull out the story, and then we can decide whose story or stories are going to best work for our purposes. So it's authenticity, but it's strategy with authenticity, if that makes sense. because, I wish that we could just go through the world telling stories for the fun of telling stories, but we're doing it with purpose and strategy and intention. So did I answer your question, Nora? Like,
Yeah,
was that?
which is making sure obviously they're authentic and real and genuine, and
Yeah.
then making sure they map back to that larger
But
strategy
marrying it back to the data.
intent. Yeah, absolutely. That definitely answered my question. And I was just also thinking back our earlier question around like the harvesting of the stories, and having an intent around doing that, as an organization, maybe even just for yourselves. And I just see here my friend Anna Killian, who I think is joining us from the south of France. Brilliant marketing comms person herself, was just sharing that the Ritz-Carlton has a way of doing this called
Mm.
story circles, where they share at all their properties, stories of impact, and then they're able to kind of roll those up, like the most impactful ones, make it all the way eventually to the CEO, and Chief Customer Experience Officer. I did not know that. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Annalie. That's a great way to do it. And I think, even thinking about how you run your own team meetings, right? And storytelling, like we have our all hands, and that's one of our goals, is celebrate and storytell, just impact even to each other. Um, so, which I think comes to maybe, this question around aligning teams, right? I think you had for me, Ellen, how do stories help align teams? And when I was thinking of some of my favorite stories of helping clients visual story tell, a lot of them were actually um, around organizational communication. You had mentioned in one of your examples, Ellen, that the internal teams didn't really understand what each other did, and we get that a lot at ImageThink, working with such big clients, global clients. That is such a common challenge. And oftentimes they're unaware kind of what the other group is doing or how they fit together. So one example I have of this is we worked with a biotech company that had merged two departments, digital strategy and analytics, which their leader felt like lots of people didn't understand within the organization what they did do and what they didn't do, right? And so we brought them together in a facilitated day. And one of the questions we asked them, and sometimes what we do is we ask really simple questions at ImageThink, right, to gain clarity, was, who is your customer? And it was interesting because not everyone in that group was aligned at who their customer was. Some people thought, well, our customer is patients, or our customer is HCP. And then other people were like, thought, oh no, our customer is actually other business unit owners within the company, because we're giving them the intel and the insights they need. And that actually sparked a really big conversation and helped the teams align to agree that yes, their customer is an internal customer. So through that process, they were able to, uncover something really basic. And then we use this metaphor of superheroes, where then they said, okay, if like we're the superheroes and we're saving the day for our internal business units, what is our superpower? What are we fighting? Like, we're fighting against maybe misinformation or lack of insight. And so we crafted a whole story that they, around this metaphor of superheroes, that they were able to leave with an aligned team mission and a charter that then they could go out and socialize, not to the world at large, but within the organization, to tell their own story of impact. And that happens a lot with our clients. Them get clear to even communicate with others within their organization the value that they bring and what they're there to do, um, as an example. So I think, there's so much similarity about our philosophy, Ellen. And one of the things that is maybe a little different is I think that we have, we have a lot of stories at ImageThink where really our clients are just trying to have organizational alignment, and we're helping them story tell to each other, versus like, out into the world, like you're doing as well. So, one thing that I was thinking was, about really good intentions, and maybe, either the audience isn't clear or the messaging isn't right. But what do you feel like is one of the biggest mistakes you see with organizations when they go out to try to tell their story?
Great question. So I think the biggest mistake by far is sometimes we'll get hired to make a video. Let's call it a video, and so the company's investing in this experience where we're telling their story with video, and sometimes they want to put all the information about all the things they've ever done and ever want to do into that video. That's a huge mistake. We would never let them do that. You need to tell stories that are focused and simple. People have limited attention spans, limited time. Everyone's busy. So that's a huge one. Another one is using big words or industry jargon. We also work in the life sciences space. And what I've found is specifically in that industry, but not limited to the industry, is there's a lot of smart, like super smart people that work in that space. Some of them found companies, they create their own companies or work at high level jobs in these companies. And then they want to use all kinds of big words on their website and make everybody like understand how smart they are. It's such a mistake. Like, don't do that, because you need to communicate to your customers. Like, we already know you're smart. We believe you. You've done all of these amazing things, and you don't have to dumb down your message, but you do have to present your message in a way that people outside of your industry are going to understand it. So, in the nonprofit space, a lot of the people that work in there are social workers who have degrees. Again, they're really smart people, and they use all these acronyms all the time. You cannot do that when you're telling your stories because the population at large doesn't know what they mean. So, those are a couple of mistakes that we see all the time. You want to create short, memorable stories that have some kind of emotional impact, that make people remember what you do, understand what you do. Just keep it simple. And you do not have to tell us every single thing, even though your company is amazing. It may have been around for 100 years. There's nothing wrong with doing some kind of content around that can be really interesting, but it has to be done in the right way because we don't need to know every single detail. So I would say that those are some of the big mistakes that we see people trying to make, but we would never let them make those mistakes
No,
because they will be
I agree.
fatal.
I think we all are a little guilty of this. So keep it simple, use plain language,
Yeah.
um, focus, brevity, and simplicity. And that is definitely a challenge we have to with with clients is um, wanting, there's so much information that we have, but then you have a level of overwhelm that nothing ends up resonating, right? And so we will ask clients when we're doing work, what are three things you want people thinking or feeling after this experience or after looking at this visual, right? And you have to focus, and maybe, I don't know, you might say as an expert, maybe three is even too many, but that, that's one way we start to help distill that information for sure, and as well as putting things in plain language. And I think there's probably a phenomenon out there, right? The more experience that you have, the more education that you have, sometimes that expert mindset can then be a little inaccessible, right, to your audience. And we see that, and probably all of us in our own uh, world need that little help of having a fresh perspective or simplified perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I see a comment about Chat GPT and launching that with lots of jargon and geek speak, which is like it has its place, I guess, but not when you're trying to explain your concept to the general public.
Yeah, and that
Would,
might be why, in our work at ImageThink, in 16 years that we've been in business, the two industries that we have the most experience are in life sciences and technology. So very complex, right, industries with um, a lot of technical terms, but in a way that makes them great candidates for simplifying and being able to, you know, be advised on how to get a message of impact out to their stakeholders.
yeah,
That's
it's one of my favorite things to do is to take a really complicated idea and sometimes we'll do animations, different from what you do, but same idea where you're simplifying something and just explaining it to make it understandable and memorable, digestible. So I just saw we had the other screen up just now, and we had the beautiful image that Sasha's working on with the QR code. So I wanted to say that there it is. That QR code gets you the companion guide, which has our framework on it. It has this beautiful diagram, so you could look at it in detail afterwards. And well, of course, our contact information, but some tips to get started. So it's free, and we'd love for you guys to, access that. So I just want to mention that. Did I forget to say anything about that, Nora?
that is great. No, Ellen's team put it together, and it has a whole kind of worksheet for you around the impact storytelling framework, which is awesome, and some tips there. And we'll also include Sasha's visual notes of the highlights, right, of the discussion that we had. And I think just before we wrap up, there was a few people who had some questions that they posted. Um, you know, One of them is how do you keep the stories going? If you have a client that really wants to invest and make it evergreen, what are some ways that, because you had said something about leverage, right, in the framework,
Yeah.
and any tips there?
Yeah. So a few different ideas there. One is we do a lot of repurposing of content. So sometimes people, so let's say you invest in making a video. Well, there's a lot of ways you can repurpose that content. We can distill parts of the story and create social media posts. We can create a blog. We can create other content. And sometimes people assume that everybody is looking at all their stuff on all the platforms all the time, so they don't want to be repetitive. Unfortunately, it's not true. People are probably digesting your content on one platform, not all of them. Nobody, they always say people obsess over what other people think of them, and they always say, well, nobody's thinking about you as much as you think they're thinking about you. It's kind of the same with business. Everybody has so much information at them, coming at them all the time, that if you get an email from somebody saying, oh wait, you repeated that story, send it to me, I'll deal with it. It's not going to happen. um, so you can use that. You can use your stories in other ways. You can repurpose your content. That's one thing. Another is we're working right now on a documentary. It's really interesting. It's about women and money and this wealth transfer that's going to happen by the year 2030, where women are going to be controlling more money than men for the first time ever. It's interesting. But in order to make our content evergreen, we're consciously not saying the year 2030.
Mhm.
We're saying within the next decade or within the next few years, or we're wording it in different ways, and we're taking out anything that would date the material. So that's another thing to think about. It's different if you have a historic date in your story for some reason that you need to reference. Keep that in by all means. But if it's something that's referencing this year or next year, or something specific, and it's going to feel outdated in 3 years, when you might be repurposing that content again, if it's a really great story, just keep that in mind. And it's okay to be a little bit vague in those cases. So those are a couple tips
Yeah,
that
those are great tips. You heard it here. I love this. Ellen is giving us permission to retell our stories and reuse the material. We spend a lot of time at ImageThink making great case studies and stories too. So that I'm excited about that. Um, so one question I have here from Rebecca, kind of related, I think, to the numbers, maybe omitting them, is if you have companies who show year-over-year narratives, how do you help show the progress of their journey? Yes, absolutely, we've done this, and sometimes these journeys are very long. So we worked with one company that every year we update, kind of create a slightly new visuals for their corporate leadership around themes for the year, goals for the year, basically their entire annual strategy and goal. And we build on that each year. We have also, worked with clients to create kind of a long-term roadmap that then they can kind of update, and each year kind of point to where they are in the progress of it, as well as keeping those fresh. Or sometimes we'll have clients come back and say, okay, we're using this, but so a few of our directions, we've evolved a little bit, and we need to adjust these elements to the visual as well. So those are some ways. But we also kind of counsel clients in the same way around specific years or numbers, is really to try to think like, what is the event horizon of the story that you're telling, so that we can be mindful of that as well. So those are just a few points there. There's one last question, and then we're going to wrap up. But I have, it's from in Kim. The question is for Ellen. It's for you, around how have you helped clients use AI storytelling? Either apps or captions or for video creation. Would love to.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. And it's unfortunately there's not a simple answer. What we have found, I mean, certainly we use AI and we encourage our clients to use AI for things like creating transcripts from video content or audio content. If we were to do an interview or a pre-interview with somebody, we would certainly use AI to create that transcript. We find it has to be cleaned up by a human. Still, there's still going to be things that AI doesn't do perfectly. Same with captions. So I would always recommend checking them and fixing them, because people make I don't want to say people are judging you, but if you have a lot of misspellings or things are wrong in your captions, it may not reflect well on your company. So you always want to check that. And we are trying really hard to keep up with all these AI editing softwares and things like that to find out what's working well, what's not working well. There's certainly been so many improvements in recent years, but I haven't yet found one that's 100% great. They all still have some glitches and some ways to go, but they can help you get started. So we have to all, find ways to use AI to get started, either with seeding an idea or developing an idea. But I would never only use AI. We still need that human element to come in and create these really great stories that are going to resonate with people. I dread the day when like full feature films are made with AI and no actors and no writers. It sounds horrible to me. So
I
we don't really want that to happen.
It's a fascinating topic, and maybe, let us know. Maybe it's an addendum to this webinar. Is, how do we, how can some of these tools be used well, right,
Mhm.
in storytelling in the in the age of AI. So thank you everyone for joining, for dialing in on your either just before lunch break or early morning break, or for those of you across the Atlantic for joining us. Thank you so much for closing your evening off, and we toast you. You can again right here. Get our companion guide by just simply scanning that QR code that has the numbers to narrative framework in it. It'll have Sasha's full visual storytelling notes for you. And this will also be on LinkedIn as well, if you would like or send to a colleague who couldn't join. Elin, if folks want to get in touch with you, how can they reach out to you?
Oh, well, here you go. Here's a QR code that will take you to our website. And of course, we have a contact page on the website. You can also email me if you do an info@riveocreative.com. That ends up in my inbox. So you can get to me that way as well. And what about you, Nora? How can people get in touch with you?
Well, I'm hoping that I have. Oh, look at that! Yes. So you can also. There's a QR code here as well. You can also email us at info@imagethink.net. And we'd love to help you tell your story with impact and visuals. And great minds think alike. This was so great to get to chat with you and hear kind of the stories behind the success of your framework. And I hope we can do it again another day, Ellen.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Since we were talking, I didn't have time to fully study this beautiful visual, but I'm going to do that right after this session is over. Look at that, Sasha.
Sasha,
Bravo.
incredible job, everybody. Sasha Brito from our team at ImageThink. She is our senior visual strategist and incredible. So thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Thanks to everybody out there and everybody at Riveo and at ImageThink that helped make this happen. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you, Nora.